Alfred the Great believed he was given authority by God himself. This was not an excuse to abuse his power, though. Rather, he saw it as a responsibility to care for his people, setting the template for the ideal kingship. Few kings were as universally loved as Alfred. Historian Edward Freeman called him the most perfect character in history. King of the Anglo-Saxons in the late 9th century, he oversaw the complete revitalization of his realm, militarily, economically, and culturally. When Alfred was just 6 years old, his mother offered a book of poems to the brother who could memorize it the fastest. Alfred, not the oldest by any means, won it, perhaps foreshadowing his later kingship's focus on education. Before his rule, England had been plagued by Viking invasions going back a century. By the time the crown of Wessex would pass to Alfred, the Danes' great heathen army had already conquered much of East England, from York down nearly to London. Immediately upon his kingship, Alfred's kingdom faced 2 defeats, forcing him to make peace, likely with large sums of silver, such that the Vikings left Wessex for the next 5 years. But his days were only turning darker. The year of 878 would mark the lowest point for Wessex. While celebrating Christmas at his royal stronghold in Chippenham, the Danes launched a surprise attack, killing most of the inhabitants. Providentially, Alfred escaped through wood and swamp with a band of defenders, fortifying a small island in the Somerset marshes. And it's from the depths of this swamp that Alfred would begin to fight back, but Wessex stood alone against the strength of the Vikings. From his swamp castle, Alfred rallied locals from the surrounding 3 shires to his cause for a free Wessex. His militia army met the Vikings led by Guthrum at the Battle of Edington, with a decisive victory. Following their defeat, Guthrum's Danes were forced to surrender after a siege at Chippenham. The terms of surrender? A baptism of the Danish leader Guthrum at Alfred's court at Aller, with Alfred as the godfather. Soon after the Christianization of Guthrum, Alfred's kingdom inherited a large portion of the northern kingdom of Mercia, raising his status from King of Wessex to now King of the Anglo-Saxons. Alfred was on his way to becoming Alfred the Great. Though Guthrum's threat was no more, the larger Viking threat continued to destabilize Wessex and neighboring kingdoms. Monasteries were razed, learning and literature diminished, and lawlessness abounded in the absence of adequate defenses. Alfred lamented, quote, "Learning had declined so thoroughly in England that there were very few men who could understand their divine services in English, or even translate a single letter from Latin." End quote. Manuscript production had all but stopped, and existing literature was lost in fires as churches and monasteries fell prey to vicious Viking attacks. The Danes had decimated cultural development in England, making it perhaps the darkest place in 9th century Christendom. Alfred was keen on developing a plan to reverse this decline, but his motivation for defending his people and revitalizing their culture went far deeper than mere ambition or love of country. The king believed in a divine hierarchy, where all authority flowed from God. His throne, lands, and people had all been placed under his care by the Creator. At the same time, he owed God obedience and owed his people protection in exchange for their loyalty. He viewed his relationship to his subjects as Christ did his flock. He expected complete loyalty, but was also willing to give everything for their sake. Alfred viewed his lordship as a sacred bond instituted by God for the good governance of man. In this context, Alfred fashioned his defense of England as a kind of holy war for the protection of his own flock. On a strategic level, he implemented the burgh system, a series of fortifications or burhs in key locations throughout his realm. 33 burhs placed roughly 20 miles apart allowed his forces to respond to Viking attacks anywhere in the kingdom at a given time. They were largely effective in mitigating Viking raids, and over time stability ensued. With constant war quelled into relative peace, Alfred was eager to begin legal, cultural, and educational reforms, perhaps recalling his childhood zeal for poetry. Alfred's new legal code drew from his religious worldview and was based on Mosaic law. Called the Doom Book, with doom meaning law, it was 120 chapters long to mirror the age at which Moses died, and in medieval biblical number symbolism, 120 stood for law. One court scholar described Alfred's dedication to law as Solomonic. He was painstakingly careful in his judicial inquiries and critical of officials who rendered unwise judgments. Most of all, he was described as merciful, gracious, and level-headed in judgment. In terms of education, Alfred was aiming for an educational renaissance in the aftermath of Viking invasions. He wrote melancholically of English Christendom's post-Viking state, quote, "Before it was all ravaged and burned, how the churches stood around all England, filled with treasures and books and a great company of God's servants." End quote. But Alfred blamed his own generation more than invasion for their educational descent. He continued, quote, "We cannot follow after our elders, and for that have lost both the wealth and the wisdom because we were not willing to bend our minds to the pursuit of learning." End quote. Thus, Alfred hatched a plan of reform to turn the tides of Anglo-Saxon culture. The key was language. Though he recognized Latin as the language of the highest learning, Alfred was practical and planned to revitalize learning through the vernacular English language. He recruited the aid of Archbishop Plegmund, Osser the Welshman, St. Grimbald the Fleming, and John the Monk of Corvey in Saxony. He placed these diverse men at the helm of a great project to translate his libraries into the vernacular. His educational reform was inspired by Charlemagne's example a century before. He revived learning by surrounding himself with eminent scholars in hopes of establishing schools and reforming the clergy. Alfred was aiming to replicate for England what Charlemagne had done for much of Western Christendom, albeit in more challenging circumstances, in terms of resources and sufficiently educated minds at his disposal. Alfred's educational reform was intertwined with spiritual reform too. He not only aimed for a more educated kingdom, but a more Christian one. Alfred lamented the Christian culture at the time, saying, quote, "The name alone we loved that we were Christians, and very few of the virtues." End quote. Historian Christopher Dawson writes that Alfred, quote, "realized the vital importance of the spiritual issue and devoted no less energy to the recovery of the tradition of Christian culture than to the defense of national existence." End quote. Ensuring an educated clergy and pious populace were of utmost importance to Alfred. He believed that he would incur God's wrath if his clergy were too ignorant to perform their duties or if monasteries and churches lay empty out of indifference. So Alfred reformed the clergy in two ways. The first was by simply appointing pious and learned bishops and abbots. The second was by distributing literature, particularly Gregory the Great's pastoral care, to bishops so they might better train and supervise new priests. Alfred accomplished many of the reforms he intended, resulting in him being greatly loved with a universal and profound love by his people. And he remains the only English monarch to be given the epithet the Great. Alfred revitalized his realm because he believed deeply in the concept of divine authority. He provided the perfect example of Christian kingship, working toward the common good of his subjects because he had God-given duties to uphold. So one wonders now how our modern leaders might act differently if they believe they also had God-given duties to uphold. The world today appears so Machiavellian, but whether past and present leaders differ in genuine motivations, or a thick fog of history simply lies between us and the truth, King Alfred stands out as an exemplary leader. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below with your thoughts. See the link in the description to support our work on Patreon to help us engage the culture with thought-provoking content outside the norm of everyday media. Also go check out our X account for daily content and our website at thinkingwest.com for long-form essays. Until next time.